My name is Sarah and I was 38 when I learned that a man can smile in your kitchen, kiss your forehead, and still be actively building a life that doesn't include you. And he can do it using your money. He can do it using your exhaustion. He can do it using your love. If you've ever been the one holding everything up while someone else quietly cut the rope, you're in the right place. Like this video, subscribe, and stick with me. And when you hear the first betrayal, I want you to tell me in the comments what you would have done. Because I promise you, I did the opposite of what they expected. I'm an interior designer. Not the hobby kind. The kind who walks into a half-built mansion with a hard hat and a tape measure and makes it feel like someone's dream. The kind who stages properties so well that buyers walk in and forget they ever lived anywhere else. I was good. I was busy. I was the breadwinner. Mark, my husband, was 40. He called himself a wealth manager. He wore crisp shirts. He spoke in calm tones. He loved words like structure, vehicles, and protected. He made money sound like something only certain people were qualified to touch. We looked perfect from the outside. We had dinner parties. We did Napa weekends. We posted the occasional photo where his hand was on my back, like he was proud. Behind that we had a private grief. 3 rounds of IVF. 3 failures. The kind that doesn't just break your heart. It rewires your whole nervous system. You start measuring time and injections and blood draws and 2 more weeks. The night the 3rd round failed, I sat on the edge of our bathtub, still in my work clothes, staring at the tile like it had answers. Mark sat beside me and said, "We're not giving up." He said it like a man who thought determination could bend biology. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Because the truth was, I was running out of places to put my hope. A few months later, I inherited just over $5 million from my grandmother, my dad's mom. The woman who taught me how to hold my posture and hold my ground. The woman who told me, when I was 16 and crying over a boy, "Men come and go, Sarah. Your name stays." She left me her estate because she'd watched me work. She'd watched me build. She'd watched me show up when nobody clapped. She also left me a house. A big old place with good bones and creaky stairs and windows that made the morning light look expensive. I cried at the reading of the will. Not because of the money. Because it felt like someone was finally protecting me. Mark hugged me afterward and said, "This changes everything." And it did. Just not the way I thought. A week after the inheritance hit my accounts, Mark showed up with a folder and that calm voice. "I've been thinking about the safest way to protect it," he said. I remember the exact way he said protect, like he was shielding a child. He told me he had a high-yield fixed-term investment set up. He said it was the kind of thing wealthy families use. He said it would mature in 3 years. He said it would secure our future child's education and lock in the money so we wouldn't be tempted to spend it emotionally. I wasn't stupid. But I was grieving. And I was tired. And I trusted my husband. So when he slid papers across the dining table and said, "Just sign here and here," I signed. I didn't know I was signing my own blindfold. A month later, my younger half-sister Mia offered to be our surrogate. Mia was 24. Same dad, different moms. She didn't inherit a penny from my grandmother because my grandmother wasn't her grandmother. Mia had that kind of beauty that people call fresh. She was soft and cute and always seemed to have a latte in her hand. She could cry on command. She could look fragile and adored at the same time. When she made the offer, she clasped my hands and said, "I want you to be a mom. You deserve it." I fell for it. Completely. I cried. I hugged her. I told her she was saving me. Mark looked like a man watching the universe finally cooperate with him. We got lawyers. We did the contracts. We did the medical screenings. And because I had money, we did everything at the highest level. Private clinic. Private hospital. A birth suite that looked like a luxury hotel room. A doula package. Nutritionists. Weekly massages for circulation. It started to feel like we weren't just trying to have a baby. We were trying to purchase certainty. Mia moved into an apartment 10 minutes from the clinic. I paid the deposit. I furnished it. I stocked the fridge. I set up auto-pay like I was running a second household. Mark called it supporting the surrogate. Mia called it feeling safe. The contract included what they called a surrogacy allowance, a pregnancy salary, to cover time off work, comfort items, maternity clothes, and quality of life. I wrote the checks. And because Mark said my inheritance was locked away for 3 years, I paid for all of it out of my business income. That's where the real betrayal started. Not in a bedroom. In my calendar. I started taking on more projects, bigger ones, tighter deadlines. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I could grind for 9 months, take a proper maternity break, and then breathe. Mark would rub my shoulders and say, "It's for the baby, Sarah." He said it every time I looked tired. He said it every time I asked why Mia needed another wellness appointment. He said it every time I asked why he was suddenly the one running errands for Mia. At first, it sounded loving. Then it started to sound like a leash. Mark began staying late at work. He said he had clients in different time zones. He said he was handling paperwork. He said wealth management was like that. Meanwhile, I was working 14-hour days. I was staging mansions. I was climbing ladders. I was lifting heavy furniture because the crew was short and the timeline was brutal. I was eating takeout at midnight, alone at my desk, scrolling through invoices with my eyes burning. And my phone would buzz. A photo from Mia. Mia in a robe at a maternity spa. Mia with a face mask on. Mia in a salt room. Mia holding up a smoothie like she'd discovered peace. "Thank you, sissy," she'd write. "Doctor says less stress is better for baby." I started to hate the way they used the baby as a weapon. When I would snap, Mark would it calm. That was his move. He'd tilt his head like I was being irrational and say, "Do you hear yourself?" Then he'd say, "We agreed to this. We're building a legacy." Then he'd finish with his favorite line. "Just 3 more years. 3 more years until the fund matured. 3 more years until everything was secure. 3 more years until I could relax." It was brilliant, in a sick way. As long as I believed the money was locked, I didn't look for it. As long as I believed the baby was coming, I didn't question the price. As long as I was exhausted, I didn't think clearly. They didn't need me happy. They needed me tired. Here's the part where you might be thinking, "Sarah, how did you not notice?" I did notice things. I just didn't have proof. Mark would come home smelling like someone else's lotion. Not perfume. Lotion. That soft powder smell that says skin was close to skin. He'd take calls in the garage. He'd step outside to get better reception. He'd keep his phone face down. And when I asked, he'd say, "Don't do this." That sentence is a threat when a man says it calmly. Mia started getting bold. She'd call me when Mark was with her and ask questions she didn't need to ask. "Do you think Mark prefers the nursery gray or the cream?" She'd say, like Mark was a co-parent with her, not with me. Or she'd say, "Mark thinks the baby will have his eyes. His, not ours." I brushed it off because the alternative was unbearable. Then, one Tuesday, my accountant called. Her name was Lila. She was sharp and allergic to nonsense. She'd been with me since my first year in business. She said, "Sarah, I'm looking at your returns and something doesn't match." I stood in a half-finished kitchen on a job site with my laptop balanced on a cardboard box. "What doesn't match?" I asked. "There's a reported investment account tied to your name that isn't showing in your statements," she said. "It's creating a discrepancy. Either the bank is missing documents or someone is reporting activity that isn't being reported to you." My stomach dropped so fast I had to grab the counter. I laughed, because sometimes your body laughs when it's about to break. "I have an investment fund," I said. "It's fixed term. It's locked." There was a pause on the other end. Then Lila said, "Sarah, I don't think it exists." The air changed. It felt like the room got colder. I told her I'd call her back. I went to my car and shut the door. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Then I drove home. Not to confront, to confirm. I walked into our home office like I was just looking for a stapler. Mark kept his desk immaculate, which should have been my first clue. I opened drawers. I checked files. I found nothing. Then I saw it. A yellow sticky note in the back corner of his desk drawer, stuck to the wood like it had been forgotten. A password. A string of letters and numbers. And under it, one word. Portal. My heart started pounding like it was trying to warn me. I took a photo of it with my phone. I closed the drawer. I walked out like I was normal. That night, Mark fell asleep fast. He always did when he thought he'd done a good day of managing. I waited until his breathing changed. That deep, confident sleep. Then I went to the kitchen with my laptop. I typed in the bank URL. I tried the login. It worked. The account overview loaded. And I felt my blood drain out of my face. There was no fixed-term fund. There was no locked investment. There were transfers. My inheritance had been moved out in chunks. Not 5 million. Not all of it. Enough to keep me from noticing at first. $2 million. I clicked through the transaction history with shaking fingers. Each transfer had a reference line. A neat little description. Consulting. Management. Property services. It was the kind of labeling that looks legitimate if you don't look too long. But I looked, and then I saw the recipient. A company name I didn't recognize. It ended with holdings, and the address attached to it was downtown. I opened another tab and searched the company name. Nothing obvious. So I searched the address. My stomach flipped. A luxury penthouse building with floor-to-ceiling windows. The kind with a doorman and a private elevator. The kind I'd used for clients. The kind I could picture Mark loving because it looked like power. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. $2 million. Not spent on a child. Spent on a life. And I knew, deep down, I already knew who he was living that life with. If you're still with me right now, I want you to do something. Pause and comment. Tell me what you'd do if you found out your husband stole $2 million from you and used it to set up a secret home. Would you confront him? Would you call the police? Would you pack a bag? Because I didn't do any of that. I did something colder. I kept reading. I dug into the documents section of the portal. The PDF. The e-statements. And that's where I found the real horror. The company wasn't in Mark's name. It was in mine. My name was on it. My signature was on it. Only it wasn't my signature. It was a sloppy version of it. A forged flourish at the end. He'd created a shell company in my name and funneled my money into it, which meant the penthouse wasn't even a gift. It was a theft disguised as me. I took screenshots. I saved PDFs. I emailed copies to a separate email I created on the spot. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen until the sun came up. The next morning, Mark kissed me on the cheek and said, "Big day?" I looked at his face. I looked at his eyes. I looked at the calm confidence. And I realized something that made my skin crawl. He thought I was trapped. He thought my inheritance was gone and I didn't even know it. He thought as long as he kept me tired, I'd never look. And he was right. Until he wasn't. I didn't confront him that day. I went to work. I did 2 meetings. I approved fabric samples. I smiled at clients. Then I drove downtown. I parked across from the building. I sat in my car and watched the entrance like I was waiting for proof I already had. Around 6, the private elevator doors opened. The doorman greeted someone with a smile. Mark walked out like he belonged there. And Mia stepped out behind him. She was wearing a soft sweater dress, one hand on her belly, the other on Mark's arm like she was the wife. Mark leaned down and kissed her temple. Not a friendly kiss. A familiar one. My whole body went numb. They disappeared into a black SUV. I sat there for a long time after that. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't even just the cheating. It was the cruelty. They had been laughing while I was breaking. Here's the micro hook I promised you, because this is where it gets worse. At the time, I thought the worst thing he'd done was lie to me about money. I was wrong. When I got home, I did the first thing I should have done weeks ago. I stopped caulking. I started documenting. I called Lila and told her I needed an emergency meeting. I didn't say why on the phone. I didn't trust anything. The next day, I sat in Lila's office with a folder of printouts. She flipped through them and her face went from skeptical to furious in about 30 seconds. "Sarah," she said quietly, "this is fraud." I nodded. My throat felt tight. "And this," she said, tapping a page, "puts you at risk. If there are loans in your name, if there are liabilities, they could try to stick you with them." That sentence snapped something in me. Because I could handle heartbreak. I could handle betrayal. I would not carry his consequences. I said, "Tell me what to do." Lila leaned back and said, "First, we lock down your identity. Then we confirm exactly what he's created. Then we get an attorney who eats men like this for breakfast." I felt my hands stop shaking. Because suddenly, I had a plan. That night, Mark came home late. He walked in humming, like life was light. He tossed his keys on the counter and said, "Mia had a craving. I ran her some stuff." He said it like he was a hero. I looked at him and said, "You're so good." It tasted like poison in my mouth. But it worked. His shoulders relaxed. He went to shower. And while he was upstairs, I opened his laptop. I didn't need to guess his password. I'd watched him type it 1,000 times. What I found wasn't a smoking gun. It was an entire bonfire. Emails to real estate brokers. A lease agreement. Insurance policies. A utility account under my shell company. And a document titled Surrogacy Disbursements. Mark had created a spreadsheet of every payment I'd made. Not to track, to manage. To see how far he could push me. At the bottom of the sheet was a note. "Keep her busy. She won't notice." I stared at that line until my eyes blurred. That's when the anger arrived. Not hot anger. Cold. Focused. The next morning I called an attorney. Her name was Denise Kaplan. She was recommended by Lila with the words, "She does not play." Denise listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Do not confront him. Do not warn him. Do not change your behavior. Men like this run when they sense a shift." I said, "He already thinks I'm exhausted and grateful." Denise said, "Good. Stay that way." Then she said, "We're going to do 3 things. We're going to secure your assets. We're going to unwind anything forged in your name. and we're going to set a trap that makes him reveal himself. I swallowed. A trap? Denise's smile was small. He's been building his fantasy on your money, she said. We're going to let him believe the final payment is coming. And then we're going to change the locks, legally. That's when I knew I'd found my person. Over the next 2 weeks I became an actress. I complained just enough to be believable. I acted tired. I acted hopeful. I acted grateful. When Mark said, just 3 more years, I nodded like a good girl. When Mia sent spa photos, I replied with heart emojis. I paid the next month's penthouse property services bill because I needed them comfortable and predictable. During the day, Denise and Lila and I worked like a team. We pulled my credit reports. There were 2 loans I didn't recognize. One was a business line of credit opened under my company name. The other was a personal loan with an electronic signature that looked like mine if you squinted. Denise's office sent fraud affidavits. They sent certified letters. They put the lenders on notice. Then Denise filed an emergency motion that did 2 key things. It froze the shell company accounts. And it prevented Mark from moving assets without consequences. Simple. Clean. She also had me set up a new bank account in my name only, and moved my legitimate business revenue into it. Mark didn't notice. Because Mark wasn't looking at my business. Mark was looking at my exhaustion. Meanwhile, we gathered evidence. Not spy evidence. Real evidence. A copy of the lease for the penthouse tied to my shell company. Utility bills showing consistent occupancy. A concierge log that listed Mark as Mr. Grant and Mia as Mrs. Grant. Grant was Mark's middle name. He'd been pretending to be her husband in a building paid for with my inheritance. Denise said, "That detail is beautiful." I almost laughed. And then, right on schedule, Mia hit the 3rd trimester. And with it came the final push. Mark started acting like the birth was a business project. He talked about timing. About payments. About closing out accounts. He told me the private hospital needed a final transfer to confirm the birth suite. "We'll do it this week," he said. "We can't have any hiccups." I looked up from my laptop and said, "Of course." Then I said softly, "I'm scared." Mark's face changed into something close to tenderness. He sat beside me and said, "You've done amazing, Sarah. We're almost there." Almost there. Meaning, in his mind, almost to the point where he could take the baby and disappear. Denise predicted that. She said, "He's going to try to get you to fund the final stage. Then he'll run. Or he'll push you out slowly and blame you. Either way, the end was coming. So we made sure it ended on our terms. That week, I scheduled a nursery reveal at our house. A small gathering. Just family and a few friends. I wanted Mark comfortable. I wanted him thinking I was still the same exhausted woman he could steer with a sentence. Mia showed up glowing. Mark showed up attentive in a way he'd never been with me in public. He held Mia's elbow as she walked. I watched it happen in my own hallway. And I smiled. Because I was watching their rope tighten. During the party, one of Mark's friends, a guy named Todd, clinked his glass and said, "To Mark. The man who never gives up." People laughed. People cheered. Todd turned to Mia and said, "You're a saint." Then Todd turned to me and said, "And Sarah, you're amazing too." He said it like an afterthought. Like I was the sponsor, not the mother. Something in me wanted to flip the table. Instead, I raised my glass and said, "To family." Mark's eyes met mine. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something. Not guilt. Calculation. He was checking my face for cracks. He didn't see any. After the party, Mark pulled me aside and said, "You did great." Like I'd performed well. Then he said, "Now we just need the final hospital payment. I'll send you the details." The next morning he did. An invoice. A routing number. A deadline. I forwarded it to Denise. Denise replied with one sentence. "Perfect. Now let me tell you about that invoice, because this is where the story stops being a betrayal and starts being a hunt." The invoice wasn't from the hospital. It was from a private billing service, a company that handled concierge maternity packages. It was the kind of middle-layer men like Mark used to hide where money actually goes. Denise had one of her associates call the service and confirm the account holder. It was Mark. Not me. Not Mia. Mark. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was charging me. He was collecting money from my accounts into his own funnel. Then he'd pay pieces of it out, like he was running the show. That's why he wanted the final payment in advance. Not for the hospital. For himself. When I realized that, I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt clear. Denise set the date. The day Mia was scheduled for a planned induction. Mark thought it would be cinematic. Controlled. Predictable. He told me to meet him at the hospital with the final transfer confirmation. He said it like he was talking to an assistant. I said, "I'll be there." That morning, I put on a black outfit, not a morning dress, not a power suit. Something clean and expensive. The kind of look that says you are not here to beg. I packed a sleek suitcase. Inside, there were no baby clothes. There were documents. Copies of the forged signatures. Copies of the shell company filings. The lease for the penthouse. A notice of immediate liquidation signed by me. An emergency protective order filed that morning to keep Mark from coming back to my home. And a letter from Denise's office notifying Mark that his access to any accounts tied to my inheritance was terminated effective immediately. I walked into that hospital like I owned the building. Because in a way I did. I'd been paying for everyone's comfort for months. Mark was waiting in the lobby. He looked stressed. He looked excited. He looked like a man standing at the finish line of a race he thought he'd won. When he saw my suitcase, he smiled. "Good," he said. "Did you bring the confirmation?" I stared at him. And for a second, I saw the whole marriage like a timeline. All the calm corrections. All the little dismissals. All the times he'd made me feel dramatic for asking basic questions. I said, "I brought what you asked for." He exhaled like he'd just avoided a problem. He leaned in and lowered his voice. "Mia's upstairs. She's nervous. Be nice. Be nice." That's what men say when they think you exist to smooth the world for them. We walked to the elevator. And that's when I did the thing that made this epic. I didn't confront him in private. I didn't cry in the hallway. I waited until we reached the floor where Mia's suite was, because Mark had made sure it was on a quiet wing. Private. Exclusive. Witness light. I wanted witnesses. So I walked past the suite. Mark frowned. "Sarah, where are you going?" "I need to talk to billing," I said. He followed me. Because he couldn't let me out of his control. At the billing desk, there were 2 employees. A nurse. And a security officer standing nearby because hospitals always have one. I set my suitcase on the counter and said clearly, "Hi. I need to confirm payment details for a concierge maternity package." Mark's face tightened. The billing employee smiled politely and said, "Of course. What's the account name?" I looked at Mark and said, "Ask him." Mark said too quickly, "It's fine. We handled it." I kept my voice calm. "No," I said. "We're handling it now." Then I opened my suitcase and slid the invoice across the counter. The employee typed. Her eyes moved as she read. Then she said, "This account is under Mark Grant." Mark's jaw clenched. I turned to him and said, "Why is the account under your name, Mark?" He laughed. A short fake laugh. "Sarah," he said, "not here." I nodded. "Exactly," I said. "Not here. Not ever. Because you didn't want anyone hearing what you've been doing." His eyes flashed. "Stop." The nurse nearby looked up. The security officer shifted his stance. Mark lowered his voice. "You're tired. You're stressed. We can talk later." There it was. The script. Make her sound unstable. Make her sound emotional. Make her sound like a problem. I smiled. And I said loud enough for the desk to hear, "You told me my inheritance was locked in a fixed-term fund for 3 years. Mark froze. I continued. "There was no fund," I said. "You moved $2 million into a company you forged in my name. You used it to pay for a penthouse downtown, the one you and my sister live in." Silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. Mark's face went pale. He said, "That's insane." I nodded again, like I expected that. Then I slid another document across the counter. The shell company filing. Then another. The lease. Then another. The concierge log. The employee stared at the papers like she didn't want to touch them. The nurse took a step back. The security officer said, "Ma'am, is everything okay?" I looked at him and said, "No, but it will be." Then I turned to Mark. "I found your lock and fund, Mark," I said. "You were right. It was locked." I paused. "I just didn't realize I was the one holding the key." Mark's mouth opened. No sound came out. I said, "The penthouse is listed under my company. I signed a sale agreement yesterday. The proceeds are already in my protected account." His eyes widened. "You can't do that." I shrugged. "I already did." He stepped closer, anger rising. "Sarah, you're ruining everything." I leaned in, calm. "You ruined it," I said. "I'm just ending it." Then I did the second move. I looked at the billing employee and said, "Please note that I'm not authorizing any further payments tied to my accounts. If someone attempts to charge anything under my information, it's fraud." The employee nodded slowly, eyes wide. Mark snapped, "This is private." I turned to him. "No," I said. "It was secret, not private." At that moment, the elevator doors opened behind us, and Mia came out. She was wearing a soft robe. Her belly was high. Her hair was curled like she was about to star in her own fantasy. She saw Mark's face. She saw my suitcase. She saw the papers on the counter. Her smile faltered. "What's going on?" she asked. Mark said, "Sarah is having a moment." Having a moment. I laughed, one sharp breath. Mia looked at me with fake concern. "Sarah," she said, "this isn't good for the baby." There it was again. The baby as a shield. The baby as a muzzle. I turned to Mia and said, "You live in my penthouse." Mia blinked. "What? You live in a home paid for with my inheritance," I said. "While I worked 14-hour days to pay you a pregnancy salary. And you both laughed about it." Mia's face tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." I pulled my phone out and opened a photo. Not a spy video. A picture of them leaving the building, taken from across the street. I held it up. Mia's throat bobbed. Mark's eyes darted. Mia whispered, "That's not what it looks like." I said, "It looks like you're holding my husband's arm like you own him." Mia's cheeks flushed. Mark stepped toward me. "Stop humiliating her." I looked at him, and the calm I felt was almost spiritual. "Humiliating her?" I said. "I furnished her apartment. I paid her bills. I paid her spas. I paid her clinic. I paid her to carry a baby that you planned to take away from me." Mia's eyes widened. "That's not true." Mark snapped, "Enough." The security officer moved closer. The nurse said, "Sir, please lower your voice." And that's when Mark made his mistake. He looked at the security officer and said, "She's unstable. She's been emotional for months. She's not thinking straight." He tried to weaponize my pain. Right there. In public. Denise told me he would. So I was ready. I pulled out the last document from my suitcase and placed it on the counter. A letter on Denise's letterhead. I read the first line out loud. "Notice of fraud investigation and immediate asset freeze." Mark's eyes shot to it. I continued. "This notice has been sent to your employer, Mark," I said. "And to the institutions holding the loans you forged. If you try to move money, open accounts, or charge anything to my identity, it triggers an automatic report." Mark's face turned gray. Mia whispered, "Mark?" Mark didn't look at her. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as a wife. As a threat. I leaned in and said, quietly, "You thought you could work me like a machine. You thought I wouldn't notice because I was desperate. You were wrong." Then I did the final humiliation. I turned to Mia. "You offered to be my surrogate," I said. "But you weren't saving me." I paused. "You were replacing me." Mia's lips trembled. "Sarah, please." I said, "No, you don't get please." Mark's phone started buzzing in his pocket. He glanced down. His expression changed. He swiped the call away. Then it rang again. He swiped again. Then his phone buzzed with a text. I watched his face read it. And I knew. That was his workplace. That was the first domino. He whispered, "What did you do?" I smiled small. "I told the truth," I said. "With documents." Mia grabbed Mark's arm. "Mark, what's happening?" Mark yanked his arm away like he didn't know her. And right there in that hospital hallway, her fantasy cracked. Because men like Mark don't love, they invest. And when an investment collapses, they abandon it. Mia looked at me, suddenly scared. "Sarah," she said, "I didn't know about the money." I tilted my head. "You knew I was paying for everything," I said. "You knew I was working myself sick. You didn't care." Mia's eyes filled with tears. Mark said, "Lo, we can fix this." That sentence was the final insult. Because it meant he thought there was still a deal to be made. I said no. Then I turned to the security officer. "I'd like an escort back to my car," I said. "I don't feel safe." Mark's head snapped up. "Are you serious?" I looked at him. "Yes," I said. "I'm serious." The security officer nodded. Mark's voice rose. "This is my child." Mia flinched. People turned. The nurse's eyes widened. And in that moment, Mark gave the whole game away. Not ours. Not Sarah and Mark. His. I looked at Mia and said, "Did you hear that?" Mia's face collapsed. Mark tried to backtrack. "That's not what I meant." I said, "That's exactly what you meant." The security officer stepped between us. "Sir," he said, "you need to calm down." Mark stared at him like he couldn't believe someone wasn't obeying. Then he looked at me again and hissed, "You're going to regret this." I said, "No, you are." I walked away. I didn't look back. In the elevator, my legs finally started shaking. My hands trembled around the suitcase handle. But my mind was clear. Because I hadn't just confronted them. I'd cut the power. When I got home, the locks had already been changed. Denise had arranged it. Legal notice posted. Security cameras updated. Access codes reset. Mark wasn't coming back to talk. He was coming back to beg. He started calling that afternoon. I didn't answer. He texted, "Sarah, this is a misunderstanding." I didn't answer. He sent a longer one. "Please, Mia is scared. The baby is coming. We can figure out custody. Don't do anything rash." Custody. There it was. He'd already moved to the next angle. He wasn't apologizing. He was negotiating. At midnight, Mia texted me, "Sarah, please." I didn't mean for this. I stared at the message and felt something close to pity. Not for her. For the version of me that used to believe her. I wrote back one sentence. "You knew I was paying. You chose him anyway." Then I blocked her. The next morning, Denise called. Mark's employer responded, she said. "They're requesting an internal meeting." I exhaled. "That fast?" Denise said, "Financial firms move quickly when there's fraud. They don't protect people like Mark, they protect themselves." By noon, Mark was spiraling. He left voicemails. One was calm. One was angry. One was crying. Crying. He said, "Sarah, I love you. I made mistakes. I was under pressure." Under pressure. As if the pressure had forced him to forge my signature and buy a penthouse. I played the voicemails once, then deleted them. Because the point wasn't to remember his emotions. The point was to end his access. Over the next week, I watched their collapse from a distance. The penthouse sale closed. The money moved into my protected account. $2 million back where it belonged. Mia's apartment lease ended. I didn't renew. The auto-pay stopped. The pregnancy salary stopped. The clinic called me because the account holder changed. They were polite, confused, professional. I said, "Please direct all future communication to my attorney." For the first time in months, I slept because I was no longer confused. Then, 3 days after the hospital confrontation, Mark showed up at my house. He tried the door code. It didn't work. He rang the bell. I watched him through the camera feed. He looked unshaven. His shirt was wrinkled. His face had that shine men get when their control is slipping. He pounded again. I opened the app and spoke through the speaker. "What do you want?" I said. His head jerked toward the camera. "Sarah," he said, voice cracking, "please, we need to talk." I said, "Talk to my attorney." He pressed his forehead to the door like he was in a movie. "Sarah," he whispered, "I'm in trouble." And there it was. Not remorse. Consequences. I said, "Good." He looked up, shocked. "You can't do this," he said. "After everything." I laughed. A real laugh this time. "After everything?" I said. "You used my inheritance to build a home with my sister. You made me work myself sick to pay for it. And you're standing at my door saying after everything." His eyes flashed. Then he said the sentence that told me I'd won. "You were supposed to trust me." I blinked. "That's what you're upset about?" I said. "That I stopped trusting you?" He looked furious. "I was trying to protect our future." I said, "You were protecting your future. And you chose my sister to live in it." Mark's mouth tightened. "Let me in," he said. I said no. He slammed his fist against the door. I watched his face change from pleading to ugly. He hissed, "Fine. You think you're smart. You think you've got it all figured out." Then he leaned toward the camera and said, "You're going to end up alone." I stared at him. And I said I already was. Then I turned off the speaker. I let him stand there, talking to a door he couldn't control. That night, I got one last message from Mia. It came from a new number. It said, "Mark left. He's gone. He took cash. He said he's not dealing with this." I stared at the screen. Then I felt it. Not triumph. Relief. Because that was always who he was. He didn't fight for love. He fought for leverage. When leverage ran out, he ran. A week later, I went back to my grandmother's house. The house she left me. The one I'd been too busy to touch because I'd been funding everyone else's comfort. I walked through it with my tape measure and my sketchbook like I was meeting an old friend. I started the renovation slowly. Not because I couldn't afford it. Because I wanted to feel every choice. I replaced the worn carpet with hardwood. I restored the original staircase. I painted the walls a warm white that made the rooms feel honest. I made the kitchen bright and open. A place for my life, not for someone else's performance. And as I worked, I realized something that still makes me smile. My job had saved me. Because while Mark thought my work was just income, it was also proof. Proof I could build. Proof I could carry weight. Proof I didn't need him. 2 months later, Denise called me with the final update. "Mark's firm terminated him," she said. "They're cooperating with investigators. He's facing charges related to forgery and misrepresentation." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Denise said, "And Sarah, you did everything right. You stayed calm. You documented. You acted fast." I opened my eyes and looked at my renovation plans spread across the table. "He thought I was weak," I said. Denise chuckled. "They always do." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my grandmother's dining room. The sunlight came through the window and landed on the wood like it was blessing it. My phone buzzed. A message from Mia. Another new number. "I'm sorry," it said. "He told me you'd never find out." I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. Because sorry doesn't rebuild what you burned. And here's what I want you to understand, because this is the part people get wrong. This wasn't a story about a man cheating. This was a story about a man outsourcing his conscience. He told himself he deserved more. He told himself I was too focused on work. He told himself my grief made me difficult. And instead of leaving like an adult, he built a hidden life and tried to finance it with my inheritance. He didn't steal from me to leave me. He stole from me to keep me working. Because a woman who is tired doesn't ask questions. A woman who is afraid doesn't investigate. A woman who is hopeful will tolerate almost anything. They used my hope like a tool. They used my money like a faucet. They used my labor like a battery. Until I stopped powering their world. Now the grandmother's house is almost finished. It looks like a magazine spread, but it feels like mine. Sometimes I pour a glass of wine and sit on the front steps and watch the sun go down. And I think about the version of me who sat on the bathroom tile after the third IVF failure, thinking she had to earn love by enduring pain. I wish I could reach back and tell her one thing. You don't have to be chosen by people who are spending you. You can choose yourself. And if this story hit a nerve, I want you to do two things. First, tell me in the comments if you've ever been used like this, even in a smaller way. Work, family, money, love. I read them. Other people read them too, and it helps more than you think. Second, if you want more stories where someone thinks they've trapped a woman and she calmly flips the entire board, like this video and subscribe. My name is Sarah, and this was my story. If you enjoyed this story, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe.